You're in the Classroom with Cat Vo. In the Classroom is a podcast where we talk about all things teaching and learning, education and research. Join me as I sit down with everyday educators and explore what's going on in the field and what this means for sustaining us as teachers in the classroom. Today's special guest is Melanie Ralph. Melanie is a Brisbane-based high school English and drama teacher with over 17 years of experience in diverse school settings. She's passionate about high expectations, student voice and teacher agency, and has a keen interest in educational philosophy, ideas which she has published in her blog as well as in the ABC. Her side hustle, Bare Bones Teaching, has over 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, offering teaching, exam and curriculum resources for teachers and students. We're so excited to have Mel on the podcast today, and we hope you find this episode insightful for your own professional growth. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Alrighty, everyone. So today we are in the classroom with Melanie Ralph. Mel, a big welcome. How are you today?
Hi, Kat. I'm great, thank you, and so excited to be with you.
We're so excited to have you here. So I always start the podcast with a story about how I met the guest. And unfortunately, we haven't actually met yet, but I wanted to tell listeners about how I encountered your work because I think there will be some resonance there. So in my second year of teaching, I found out really late in the year that I would be thrown into the pool of essential English. And now, as someone who has never taught essential English in my life, I realized, oh no, I have no idea what this subject entails, what the coursework is about. And I remember just looking through Julie Arnold's Essential English textbook, and shout out to Julie and the episode that you did with Hoops of Steel. She's great. I remember looking through that and being like, what does all of this mean? Cultural assumptions, attitudes, values, beliefs. I just got really freaked out. So I went on YouTube to Google cultural assumptions, attitudes, values, and beliefs, and you will never believe what popped up. It was a video of you teaching it in the classroom with a link at the bottom to your booklets. And I remember a line that said, hey, if you want to thank me somehow, you can always drop me $2 for a coffee. And I thought, man, this person is awesome. And so I've been, Melanie, a huge fan of your work for so many years now in this space, and you're an incredibly passionate teacher. So can you begin by telling our listeners about you and how you got into this space of teaching and posting your videos online?
I'd love to, Kat, and I really value that story because that tells me that my ambition, my goal is being achieved, right? Whenever I post something online, I always think to myself, if this can help just one teacher, then to me, that's a success, right? And I think one of my early Essential English videos was explaining the CIA, the Common Internal Assessment. And I thought this was going to be the world's most boring video. In fact, it pretty much is. But I thought with that premise in mind, if that helps just one teacher, then to me, that's mission accomplished. And to my complete surprise, I posted this boring video. And the next morning, an email came through from a teacher, sort of in your shoes there, Kat, thrown into Essential, Googles a phrase and comes across to me. So that kind of story really just, it means the world to me. Absolutely. So great to be with you. And my story begins, this is my 17th year of teaching. And I'm still getting my head around saying that phrase. It takes a few months at the beginning of the year. I get used to saying 15th, 16th, now 17th. It starts way back, graduating high school. I had my sights set on being an actor and going to study acting at QUT in Brisbane here. And I come from a family of really dedicated public educators. Mum and dad, both public school educators, dad a principal, mum a year 3 teacher. My sister now is a teacher as well. So, it was kind of a nudge from dad to say, hey, you might not want your paycheck to be reliant on high stakes auditions for the rest of your life. So why don't you consider being a drama teacher? So that's what sort of opened the door. At first, I had a couple of really inspiring teachers at my own high school. And to be honest, the pull at that point was this idea that a teaching degree would allow me to travel the world and make a little bit more money than, say, hospitality or retail. So truly that early motivation was financial, based on the sense of adventure and that sort of freedom that it would entail. And so I can say with confidence it was only about halfway through the degree. Happily for me, it was at my first prac at an all-girls school teaching a lesson on Pride and Prejudice that I started, and I was like 19, and there's grade 12 girls. And I looked around and said, hey, actually, this is awesome. And in some ways, it is, in some ways, a little bit performative. It's not that I'm a performer as a teacher, but I love that element of connected energy in the room. And that was when I said, cool, I actually want to be a teacher now, not an actor. And so that's that door originally. And as I mentioned, whenever I talk about my teaching journey, it interestingly begins at Alice Springs High School. So from QUT Brisbane out to the Northern Territory, I think I was pulled towards adventure and challenge. And when I didn't get a call for a Queensland job when I graduated, I just took matters into my own hands and I said, well, I'll go somewhere where I'm needed right now, as opposed to waiting for the phone to ring. And that's what led me to the Northern Territory. And so in many ways, I did use the degree, Kat, to achieve that goal of adventure. I let it take me to London. It took me to Canada, Vancouver. And so it was a good maybe 10 years before I got back here to Brazil.
That's incredible, Mel. I wanted to ask about that other specialist area that you have, which is drama, because I find that your passion for the arts may also have an influence on your pedagogy. Would you say that it has changed the way in which you teach as well in being an English teacher?
I would, Kat. Absolutely. I think, I haven't taught drama now for about maybe 6 years. And so it's funny to be so active in the English space in Queensland now, when actually my first teaching area is drama. And I think that creative industries degree influences all of my teaching, frankly, in the skills that I learned in that part of my degree. The first 2 years was predominantly acting and studying plays. And I'm a huge believer in the value of aesthetics. And I draw that into my English classrooms wherever possible. It's not that I'm clearing the desks for drama games, right? That can be sometimes a little ambitious in the daily grind. But I think perhaps that lens of arts and performance can be very useful in the English classroom.
Can you unpack some examples on the ground in which you might use with your students in that space?
Yeah, I can. I got two off the cuff here, Kat. So very recent ones, actually. We just kicked off Frankenstein in Year 12 English. And again, I sort of been on an evolution as a teacher away from PowerPoint, which was, quite heavy in my early career. In fact, if you contrasted me now to even 10 years ago, I think I had this 45 slide PowerPoint on romanticism or something. And it looked so good. It was so pretty. It was so gorgeous. I poured my heart and soul into this PowerPoint. And somewhere along the lines, I've obviously, kept growing as a teacher and reflected on perhaps that sort of inherent passivity that came with that. And what you have now is, I said, well, I'm off to Officeworks and I'm going to print in color. Cost me maybe $50-$60. I'm going to print in color 6 or 7 famous romantic paintings, and I'm going to get them color printed, laminated, so I can use them each year. And I'm actually going to talk about some characteristics of romanticism, and then I'm going to put the kids in the driver's seat and give them each a painting. This means it's tangible, right? They can get up close, they can look at the brush strokes, projecting it on the big screen as well, so they could come up close to it. And what I have found in that kind of example is when the kids are telling me, how is this painting reflective of the romantic ideals? And what I can see in real time in the classroom is the brains are working harder, right? The learning's getting deeper and the skills required are more extensive than just sort of an open wide, let Miss Ralph tell you about romanticism. And so drawing on the paintings is one example. And the second one I can say is, just sprinkling in a little bit of role playing here and there. So even something quite relatively safe, like tableaus or AKA freeze frames, that can take the pressure off kids, right? Because they're quite often they're not drama kids. we're in an English classroom, there's desks, you know, it's not a drama studio, but sometimes something like freeze frames can actually draw deeper learning out of the students. And so that's an example of what I might do in terms of quite scaffolded, but up off the chairs every now and again for something a little more interactive.
Yeah, I love that so much. I would say that that speaks a lot to just the accessibility of really difficult and hard cognitive work in English and how the arts can just open up that entry point for all students to be able to just unpack and understand something through the arts. I find that just incredible. So, Mel, I love your work and I love you sharing this so much. Can we zoom into a bit more of the, I guess, knowledge and skills based things that teachers are asked to also unpack as part of the syllabus? And things like in English, we have aesthetic features and stylistic devices. And in essential English, we have cultural assumptions, attitudes, values, and beliefs. Could you unpack for me? Let's go in the English realm. Aesthetic features and stylistic devices. I feel like it's just a common dot point that many teachers look at and they're like, ugh, what is this? What does this even mean? How do you distinguish between the two and teach it? That's what I want to know.
Oh, that's excellent. I mean, and we all get a bit lost, don't we, Kat, in the dot points, right? Like if you, we've got these, you know, the criteria, the syllabus, you've got your school curriculum, and you've got your ISMGs, and you've got your dot points. And sometimes it can actually, and I really do empathize with teachers coming into the profession at any stage of their life, whether they're younger beginning teachers or changing careers. So first and foremost, I have to say it's really quite natural, I think, to be a little bit blindsided by the amount of specifics we're meant to be ticking off in our teaching. And I think that my passion as an English teacher is also around opening kids' minds up to recognize that the stuff we're talking about in class and the stuff we're assessing you on and the stuff that's on that marking sheet, it's not hocus pocus. It's actually stuff that's around you every day in the world. And I think that's the hardest thing as an English teacher is to open up that connection between what we're asking you to do in the classroom and having, and it's a beautiful moment when you can achieve it, having a moment with a student where they go, oh, this stuff here is in my TikTok feed. This stuff here is being spouted by politicians every day in the way that they influence your opinion, the rhetorical devices they're using. It's even used on something, we'll go to something really basic like the school website. So if you bring up, this is a great experiment for teachers out there, you bring up your school's website on the big screen, right? And you say, how are we representing ourselves through words and images? And it's something known to them and they go, it's something they've taken for granted, right? We look at websites all day. But if we can slow it down, just sort of zoom into this kind of real life accessibility, I think helps students to go, oh, I see this, I get it. What they're asking me to analyze in my English classroom is the stuff that exists out there everywhere.
Yes, I love that so much. I'm so grateful that you shared that because it can be so easily reduced to here's a bunch of bullet points for what fits under aesthetic features and what fits under stylistic. Now go and analyze it without that backing of context and of making that known to students that this is how meaning is made in the world. And if we are not cognizant of that, it all, it can all just fall apart. And I think, yeah, how amazing is that that we can do that as English teachers? That's great.
Well, indeed, and that we can do that sometimes, Kat. I have to put a caveat there. we I strive to do that. Whether or not I land that every day is a different thing, but certainly that's my ambition to sort of unlock that that divide between what we do at school and what exists out there. It's as you would know, it's critical now more than ever with that, that increase in manipulated media, misinformation. Helping kids to unlock that stuff is critical.
So I want to pull that into the unlocking of the critical for you as an educator, because us as teachers, we are constantly being subjected to many discourses about what works, evidence-based. There's all of this conversation and talk around teachers that honestly can make it very confusing for the teacher that's just working hard on the ground for their own students and they're being positioned in all kinds of ways. So, what has helped you unlock that critical thinking for yourself as an educator?
That's a great question, Kat. And you're right. I mean, it's a pretty busy narrative in Australia with regards to what works best, evidence based. And those topics require a little bit of reflection and a little bit of scrutiny from teachers to, ask questions about like, what are the motivations behind some of those narratives, particularly when it's from that journalistic viewpoint? What are the agendas behind some of those calls to fix schools in this country? And as you say, at the coalface is the teacher, right? And they're the ones shuffling between classrooms to get their work on the ground done. And I think, sadly, over the last few decades, the teacher's voice, the collective voice of teachers, has become undervalued in terms of the expertise that they do bring to the classroom every single day, as shall we say, the megaphone, so to speak, has sort of essentially been handed to policymakers, journalists, etc. And so I say that to acknowledge essentially the kind of toxic and kind of bleak background that teachers work in front of. And many teachers would likely tune out from it, and I wouldn't blame them. For me, it was building into quite a deep frustration of feeling as a workforce undervalued. And so my reading and sort of critique of some of those narratives was a way for me to essentially feel empowered. Again, maybe my goals are too small, Kat, but I thought if one teacher reads it and says, yeah, I feel like that too, then for me, I felt that was an achievement to just reflect some of those real voices from the ground and to essentially push back somewhat against the prevailing darkness.
Yeah, I think, Mel, you've really shown that in your work. You've shown that teachers can have a voice on these issues and aspects, but within that voice, they can also recognize their agency, which lies in the classroom and within their own autonomy. It's oddly like there is hope in the bleak darkness of the educational landscape in which we're in. And I think if we are to tie it back to your pedagogy and the ways in which you are interacting with your students, even on the day-to-day basis, such as printing out those artworks and getting students to really go deep in what they have to learn, it's almost like you're bringing those realms together of, hey, we can really challenge where this is all going with our own agency. And we just need teachers to be having a voice in this space. And I love you for doing that. Thank you so much for challenging a lot of that.
Thanks, Kat. And I think, you're touching on some pretty juicy concepts here around teacher agency and autonomy. But the word that I'm loving that you've just mentioned there is hope. And I think the longevity of my full-time teaching career in 17 years, there's been many times where I have felt the weight of the system. You feel the limitations of an underfunded public system. You see with your own eyes the very real outcomes of a, horrendously underfunded system. You see the real impact of teacher shortage and the ripple-on effect of that in terms of collapsed classes, overworking of the teachers who remain. So we have this conveyor belt of complexity and challenge. And so if anything now more than ever, the teachers who we do have to, with everything they've got, maintain a sense of purpose and hope, because that doesn't come from a policymaker and that doesn't come from a school leader. It's something that has to burn within you to know why you're turning up and what your goal is here every day. And sometimes that can't be as, overly ambitious of changing lives today. But as any teacher will know, sometimes you actually can never know the difference you're making just by showing up with a sense of like open-hearted hope for kids.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think you're just spitting gold there, Mel. I wanted to ask you this. So you've been in the field for 17 years now, and that's quite a long time, given much of the attrition tends to happen in the early career stages or and so forth. So what is sustaining your development of your expertise? Like we can see the research is sustaining your critical thinking in many different ways. Can you tell our guests about that as well as about your teaching expertise? What are you looking at or going to in order to grow your own professional development?
Well, I think, like, I came back to this word valuing, right? And valuing the profession, valuing yourself as a teacher. You'll hear sometimes people say, I'm just a teacher. And so I think maybe about 8-10 years ago, I trained myself to ditch that word just. I'm just a teacher. So I think for me, it's twofold. The research and the interest in growing my mind and my expertise has been self-directed, self-paced, because I realized I can't expect, the word should be expect. I can't expect my school to sustain my desire for intellectual pursuits, critical discussions. We know on the ground it's quite difficult to do that. And I'm not expecting my school to, rise to that challenge. Obviously, I have fantastic collegial connections and conversations, but to sustain my interest, it had to come from me. So it had to be my agency in seeking out growth. I sometimes use this analogy of imagine like teachers like a fleet of cars, and imagine that they never get tune-ups, right? Because quite often the system is not offering you adequate tune-ups. And so while I'd love for that to change, while I'd love for there to be more opportunity for that, I wasn't prepared to wait for opportunities to grow. So I took that myself, and that came from writing on my blog and really listening. I think the longer you're a teacher, you're able to start questioning, well, that worked well, why? Or that didn't work well, why? Or that's pissing me off, how come? And so to follow some of those interests was really deeply satisfying for me. And the second part of my answer here is around reframing what I viewed to be success as a teacher and how I value myself. And there was a period of time there, Kat, where I was, in many ways, I was caught in a sort of framework of thinking that to succeed as a teacher, you had to go up, or people would notice you're pretty decent at teaching and say, you're really good, you should be a head of department, or have you thought about leadership? And I went on a bit of a journey with that too, Kat, in thinking that, I guess that's what I need to do. I've been teaching for this many years. You're sort of made to feel that you get to a certain point of years in the room, now you should be going upwards. And that for me was a journey in terms of applying for a few roles that I didn't get. And I'm so glad I didn't get. And a bit of soul searching from that, Kat, to say, well, I love being in the room and I'm still growing being in the room. And in fact, it's limitless being in the room. And so I kind of dismantled my own thinking around what it means to be successful as a teacher and completely banished the idea that it means going, quote, up. Instead, I said my value comes from going out in terms of even right now connecting with you, Kat. Fantastic. It comes from professional networking. It comes from meetups. It comes from sharing ideas online, talking with colleagues, pursuing projects that bring me joy.
This is incredible. I think the expectation of having to go up versus this reframing of going out speaks to what Brian Stevenson, this incredible human rights lawyer in the US, is talking about, this idea of being proximate, like the power of proximity, of being close to your students and being on the ground to hear the ways in which they're learning, to see how your teaching is shaping their lives. I think the further up you move through a system, the more disconnected you become with the lives of students on the ground. And I think that's where the most impact is, if anything. I love that. I love that so much. So, Mel, for our listeners, can you just wrap up by telling them any last few words you would like to encourage them with, or any final thoughts?
Sure. And I think I want to also just come back to that idea of how you value yourself as a teacher. I think there's a lot of sort of self-surveillance that teachers put themselves through. In this, it manifests, Kat, you probably would have seen it before, like hashtag teacher guilt. So there's this massive amount of baggage that teachers will sometimes willingly take on And I guess part of still feeling healthy and happy in this role, truly still feeling very healthy and happy and loving it, I think that comes from very firm boundaries in, in how much of myself I will give to the role and how much focus that I put onto my mental health and physical health, and taking that time for me, and always remembering that the ginormous mechanism of a school, I say it can be both, is both terrifying and liberating to know that if you are sick and stay home, it will keep going and the kids will be okay. And the most important thing that you can do for yourself as a teacher and for those kids that need you to be well and present is to keep putting yourself first and valuing yourself for the work that you do, and for particularly your health, because you know what, you've got to put those boundaries up and stay well for yourself and for your kids.
I think that's a beautiful message to end off. Well, Mel, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of In the Classroom. It's been so much fun. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Loved it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of In the Classroom. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, rate me 5 stars, and leave a review. Don't forget to share this episode with anyone who might find it inspiring. That's all from me, and I'll see you next episode. Thanks for listening to In the Classroom.